Vulcan military students recoiled with horror and amazement as retired human General George Mitchell showed grotesque footage of outnumbered human soldiers brutally ambushing and slaughtering a superior Zorgon army. Mitchell strode to the front of the Vulcan Military Academy lecture hall, his prosthetic leg clacking with each step. He surveyed the room of wide-eyed Vulcan cadets who eagerly hung on his every word, reputations of his brilliant strategies and ruthless guerrilla tactics preceding him. Tales of Mitchell's cunning exploits in the Terran-Zorgon War sent nervous energy buzzing through the auditorium. "Everything you've learned about warfare up till now has been bullshit," Mitchell growled, his gruff voice booming through the stunned silence. "I'm here to teach you what real soldiers do, what keeps them alive, and I guarantee it ain't your predictable textbook tactics." The aging general tapped a button, and the hollow projector hummed to life, bathing the hall in flickering light. Mitchell's younger self, caked in blood and dirt, appeared on screen, barking orders to a haggard band of human troops. They moved without a wasted step, hurling incendiaries and positioning ambushes with merciless efficiency, faces etched with hardened determination. "You rely on superior numbers and technology, crushing foes through formulaic maneuvers, but against an unpredictable enemy who will stop at nothing to win, you'll get slaughtered wholesale." The footage played out, showing the battle-worn humans wreaking utter chaos and carnage against a Zorgon force that looked on with growing terror and confusion, as all their well-drilled training failed before the humans' savagery and psychological onslaught. Tyro, the Academy's star pupil, shakily raised his hand. "General, how did you achieve victory when the Zorgons had every strategic advantage?" Mitchell fixed him with a cold stare and grim smile. "Kid, there's one thing you always gotta remember. War ain't about advantages. War is about pure fucking will, and trust me, humans have that in goddamn spades." The cadets looked at each other uneasily, a collective shudder running through them. They realized everything they thought they knew, everything that made them feel safe, was about to be torn to shreds by the man standing before them. A living, breathing incarnation of humanity's sheer, stubborn refusal to lose, no matter the odds. The next few weeks were a relentless gauntlet of grueling training exercises that pushed the Vulcan cadets to their breaking points. George subjected them to every dirty trick in the human playbook, from midnight ambushes to booby-trapped obstacle courses. He forced them to navigate dense jungles with nothing but a knife and their wits, pitting squads against each other in unconventional war games where the only rule was to win at any cost. Many cadets buckled under the pressure, their rigid Vulcan discipline crumbling in the face of George's unorthodox methods. But Tyro thrived, his mind adapting quickly to the chaotic, unpredictable nature of human-style warfare. He learned to trust his instincts, to improvise on the fly, and to exploit his enemy's weaknesses with ruthless efficiency. George took notice of Tyro's aptitude and began personally mentoring the young Vulcan, pushing him harder than any of the other cadets. He subjected Tyro to even more brutal training exercises, forcing him to confront his own limits and overcome them through sheer force of will. One particularly grueling day, Tyro's squad was navigating a treacherous swamp when they were suddenly ambushed by a group of instructors armed with stun weapons. Tyro's squad mates were quickly incapacitated, dropping like flies as the instructors closed in. But Tyro refused to go down without a fight. He ducked and weaved through the dense foliage, evading the instructor's shots with lightning reflexes. He rallied his remaining teammates, urging them to stay low and follow his lead. Using a combination of misdirection and improvised traps, Tyro lured the instructors into a narrow ravine. As they closed in, he sprang his trap, triggering a rock slide that sent boulders crashing down on the unsuspecting instructors. With the enemy disoriented, Tyro and his squad launched a furious counterattack, engaging the instructors in brutal close-quarters combat. They fought with a savage intensity, using every dirty trick George had taught them to gain the upper hand. In the end, Tyro's squad emerged victorious, standing over the groaning bodies of their defeated foes. As the exercise ended, George approached Tyro, a rare smile on his weathered face. "Not bad, kid," he said, clapping Tyro on the shoulder. "You're starting to think like a human." Tyro, exhausted but proud, could only nod in acknowledgement. But before he could savor the moment, it was interrupted by the sudden arrival of a high-ranking Vulcan military official flanked by armed guards. The official strode up to George, his face a mask of concern. "General Mitchell, a situation has arisen that requires your immediate attention." George scowled, clearly annoyed by the interruption. "Can't it wait? I'm in the middle of training here." "I'm afraid not, sir. We need your expertise urgently." George sighed and turned to Tyro and the other cadets. "Duty calls, kids. Keep practicing what I've taught you. I'll be back as soon as I can." With that, he followed the official out of the training ground, leaving Tyro and his fellow cadets to wonder what new challenge awaited their unconventional instructor. Whatever it was, they knew one thing for certain. With George Mitchell on the case, the enemy didn't stand a chance in hell. Tension thickened the air of the briefing room as George faced the Vulcan military leader across a shiny metal table. Hollow displays flickered with grim tactical data. "A Zorgon splinter cell has seized control of Vulcan colony Rigel 6, the official stated, his face stony. "They're holding the civilians hostage, threatening mass executions if we don't comply with their demands." George leaned forward. "What have you tried so far?" "A rescue operation. But the Zorgons saw our standard tactics coming light years away. We lost a lot of good soldiers." The official's voice wavered. He met George's eyes. "We need you, Mitchell. You're the only one who's beaten them." "I'll do it. On one condition, I bring my own team, cadets I've been training." "Your elite forces already failed," George snapped. "My cadets have learned to think like humans, to be unpredictable. It's our best shot." George nodded grimly. "Assemble transport to Rigel 6. I'll brief my team." 30 to Bundesliga, Fuber. Tyro snapped to attention as George strode into the secret meeting, the other wide-eyed cadets rising hastily. "A Vulcan colony is under siege by Zorgon terrorists," George said bluntly. "The Vulcan military has requested my help. I'm requesting yours." Uneasy glances, raised eyebrows, George pressed on. "This will be more dangerous than anything you've faced, but you've proven yourselves. I need a team I can count on to expect the unexpected. Any volunteers?" Silence. Then Tyro stepped forward, jutting his chin high. "I volunteer, sir." A ripple went through the cadets, then one by one every hand raised. Determined eyes fixed on George. He smiled. "I knew I could count on you. Grab your gear. We leave at 500. As the cadets scrambled to prepare, George pulled Tyro aside. He pressed a weathered knife into the young Vulcan's hand. "I've carried this blade through many battles. Saved my hide more than once. I'm entrusting it to you now." Tyro turned the knife over reverently, noting nicks and stains on the handle. Generations of human soldiers' grit and tenacity etched into tempered steel. "Remember what I've taught you," George said. "Keep your wits sharp and lead the team well." "I won't let you down, sir." Tyro gripped the knife tightly, a spark igniting in his eyes. "We'll show the Zorgons what it means to fight like humans." George clapped Tyro on the shoulder. "That's what I like to hear. Now let's go remind those bastards why they shouldn't have messed with us." The transport ship shuddered as it broke through Rigel 6's atmosphere, anti-aircraft fire bursting around them. George gripped the armrest, prosthetic leg braced against the deck. Tyro and the other cadets checked their weapons, faces etched with focus. Tyro leaned forward, studying the holomap of the city. "What's our play, sir?" George zoomed in on a section of the map, revealing a tangled web of tunnels beneath the city streets. Sewers. They're ancient, half forgotten, but they'll get us inside their perimeter. He pointed to 2 glowing markers. "We'll split into 2 teams. I'll lead Alpha Squad here, hit 'em head-on, draw their fire. Tyro, you take Bravo through the sewers, come up behind 'em, pincer the bastards." The cadets nodded grimly, the weight of the mission settling on their shoulders. George clapped Tyro on the back. "You got this, kid. Remember what I taught you. Expect the unexpected." The transport shuddered again as it touched down on the outskirts of the city. The ramp hissed open, revealing a hellscape of smoke and rubble. Distant explosions shook the ground. Tyro led Bravo Squad in the opposite direction, towards a rusted sewer grate. They pried it open, gagging at the stench wafting up. One by one, they dropped into the darkness, sloshing through ankle-deep muck. "Stay sharp," Tyro whispered, knife clenched in one hand, rifle in the other. "Could be anything down here." They moved forward cautiously, the only sound the drip of water and their own ragged breaths. Suddenly a burst of plasma fire lit up the tunnel ahead. Tyro dove for cover, heart pounding. "Ambush," he hissed as more shots zipped past. Bravo Squad returned fire, but the Zorgons had the advantage of numbers and position. Tyro's mind raced, George's lessons flashing through his head. He scanned the tunnel, eyes landing on a weak point in the ceiling. A plan formed, desperate and daring. "Grenades!" he barked, pulling a pair from his belt. "Lob 'em at the ceiling, then hit the deck." Bravo Squad obeyed without hesitation, hurling their grenades in a high arc. The explosions rocked the tunnel, dust and debris raining down. For a moment, all was chaos and confusion. Then, with a groan of tortured metal, the ceiling collapsed, tons of rock and rubble crushing the Zorgon patrol. Tyro and his team hugged the walls, narrowly avoiding being buried alive. As the dust settled, Tyro coughed and wiped grit from his eyes. "Everyone all right?" Shaken but determined nods all around. They pressed on, clambering over the impromptu barricade. Above, the sounds of battle grew louder, more desperate. George's distraction was working, but Tyro knew it couldn't last forever. They had to move fast. Finally, they reached their exit point. Tyro kicked open the grate and hauled himself up, blinking in the sudden daylight. The Zorgon command center loomed ahead, a bristling fortress of black metal and plasma cannons. "This is it," Tyro said, checking his rifle's charge. "We hit 'em hard and fast, just like the General taught us. No mercy." Bravo Squad burst from the sewers like vengeful wraiths, charging across the rubble-strewn ground. Surprised Zorgons fell before their onslaught, unprepared for an attack from behind. Tyro was a whirlwind of violence, George's knife flashing in one hand, rifle bucking in the other. He carved a path of destruction towards the command center, his squad fanning out behind him. Ahead, George's team was being pushed back, Zorgon reinforcements pouring in from all sides. Just as it seemed they would be overrun, Tyro's squad slammed into the Zorgon rear lines like a hammer blow. The Zorgons reeled, caught between two fronts. In the confusion, Tyro kicked down the command center door and stormed inside, knife bared. The Zorgon leader turned to face him, eyes widening in shock and rage. He lunged, plasma sword humming to life. Tyro met him head-on, human steel clashing against alien energy. They traded blows in a deadly dance, sparks flying, consoles shattering. Tyro fought with every ounce of skill and savagery George had drilled into him, but the Zorgon leader was a formidable opponent. A plasma bolt seared Tyro's shoulder, the pain nearly blinding. He gritted his teeth and pressed forward inside the Zorgon's guard. With a primal scream, he buried George's knife to the hilt in the leader's chest. The Zorgon stared at him in shock, then crumpled to the floor, gurgling his last. Tyro yanked the knife free, chest heaving. It was over. Outside, the Zorgon's will to fight evaporated with their leader's death. They threw down their weapons, hands raised in surrender. George burst into the command center, rifle at the ready. When he saw Tyro standing over the dead Zorgon, he broke into a fierce grin. "You did it, kid," he said, clasping Tyro's hand. "I knew you had it in you." His suspicions were confirmed moments later, when a priority message pinged on George's wristcom. It was from Vulcan High Command, marked urgent. George's face darkened as he read it. "What is it?" Tyro asked, dread coiling in his gut. George looked up, eyes hard as flint. "New threat. Something big, something bad enough to have the brass pissing themselves." He met Tyro's gaze, a silent question passing between them. Tyro nodded, grip tightening on the knife. Whatever was coming, they'd face it together, as humans always had. as they always would. George's prosthetic fist slammed onto the conference table, the metallic clang echoing through the briefing room. Tyro and the other cadets stood at rapt attention, their faces grim as they absorbed the dire news. High Command had just revealed a terrifying development. A mysterious alien race known as the Ethereals had begun a brutal campaign of conquest, their advanced ships appearing without warning to enslave defenseless worlds on the fringes of Vulcan space. Grainy holograms flickered to life, displaying scenes of utter devastation. Ethereal war machines, sleek and deadly, carved through planetary defenses like a scythe through wheat. Their ground troops moved with eerie precision, employing tactics that seemed torn straight from humanity's playbook. "I don't like this," George growled, his eyes narrowing as he studied the footage. "Those maneuvers, that coordination, it's too damn familiar." Tyro nodded slowly, a cold knot of dread forming in his gut. The Ethereals fought like humans. No, they fought like George, as if they'd learned from the Master himself. "We need to get to the bottom of this," George declared, his voice hard as steel. "I'm taking a team for a covert recon mission. We'll infiltrate ethereal space, gather intel, find out what the hell is going on." He turned to Tyro and the cadets, his gaze sharp and assessing. In that moment they were no longer students, they were soldiers, hardened by the battles they'd fought, forged in the crucible of George's unorthodox training. "I won't lie to you. This is going to be the most dangerous op of your lives. But you're the best damn squad I've ever trained. I need you with me on this." Tyro stepped forward, his spine straight, eyes blazing with determination. "We're with you, sir, to whatever end." The others murmured their assent, each ready to lay their life on the line for their mentor, for the cause they believed in. In a matter of hours, they were soaring through the void in a ship that was little more than a ghost, a stealth vessel designed to slip past enemy sensors like a whisper in the night. George pored over the scant data they'd managed to scrape together, searching for patterns, for any scrap of insight into their mysterious foe. Tyro and the others checked and rechecked their gear with a grim focus, the weight of the mission settling heavily on their shoulders. And then, without warning, all hell broke loose. Alarms blared as the ship shuddered under a sudden impact. Consoles sparked and smoked, damage reports flooding in from every deck. "We're under attack," Tyro shouted over the chaos, struggling to make sense of the garbled sensor readings. Some kind of cloaked ship, it came out of nowhere. George's face was etched in stone, his prosthetic hand flashing across the controls as he fought to keep them alive. But it was a losing battle. The ethereal vessel danced around them like a predator toying with its prey, its weapons slicing through their shields like a blade through silk. With a final shuddering groan, their ship went dark and still, dead in space, utterly at the mercy of their attackers. As the Ethereals closed in, preparing to board, George stared at the readouts with a growing sense of horrified realization. The way they'd anticipated his moves, countered his every tactic. Before he could say more, the airlock exploded inward in a hail of shrapnel and searing light. Ethereal soldiers poured through the breach, their movements precise, almost mechanical. Tyro and the cadets fought like demons, putting every shred of George's training to the ultimate test. But the close confines of the ship worked against them now, and the Ethereals seemed to know every inch of the vessel, every choke point and blind corner. In the chaotic din of gunfire and screams, Tyro lost sight of George, caught up in a desperate hand-to-hand struggle with an ethereal trooper. By the time he'd finally driven his blade into the creature's throat, the old soldier was gone. Dragged away by the boarders, still bellowing defiance even as he disappeared into the smoke and ruin. There was no time to mourn, no chance to mount a rescue. The ship was coming apart around them, and the Ethereals just kept coming. With tears stinging his eyes and a howl of anguished rage clawing at his throat, Tyro rallied the survivors, leading a fighting retreat to the shuttle bay. They piled into the nearest escape pod, blasting free of the doomed ship, just as it erupted into a miniature sun. As they limped away, leaving George behind in the hands of the enemy, Tyro could only watch through the porthole, his heart shattering into jagged shards. The look on George's face in those final moments, even as the ethereals hauled him away, seared itself into Tyro's mind. Not fear, not despair, but grim, iron-willed determination. A silent promise that this was not the end, that he would endure whatever lay ahead, that he would find a way to fight on. Battered in body and spirit, Tyro and the broken remains of the team crawled back to Vulcan space, bearing the gut-wrenching news of George's capture. High Command fell into turmoil and confusion, paralyzed by the revelation that their enemy possessed such intimate knowledge of human tactics. But for Tyro, the path ahead had never been clearer. He would find George, whatever it took. He would unravel the ethereal's dark secrets and discover the truth of their connection to humanity. And then, with the last gift George had given him clenched tight in his fist, that battered, battle-scarred knife, Tyro would show them the true meaning of human vengeance. The planning began in earnest, a desperate scheme taking shape in the war-torn corners of Tyro's mind. He would not abandon his mentor, his friend, to the clutches of these shadowy horrors. Even if he had to tear the galaxy apart with his bare hands to do it. In the days following George's capture, Tyro and his cadets threw themselves into the search for their mentor with a desperate intensity. They scoured every scrap of intel, chased down every whispered rumor, hoping for some clue that might lead them to the ethereal's doorstep. But the enemy remained maddeningly elusive, their secrets guarded behind a veil of shadow and silence. Weeks dragged by, each dead end more frustrating than the last. The cadets grew haggard and hollow-eyed, driven by a grim determination that bordered on obsession. It was Xander, the team's tech specialist, who finally found the break they needed. He burst into the command center one night, eyes wild with excitement, clutching a data pad in trembling hands. "I've got something," he said, his voice shaking. "An ethereal transmission, heavily encrypted. Took me days to crack it, but it mentions a research facility, hidden away on some uncharted rock in the arse end of space." Tyro snatched the pad, scanning the decrypted text with a surge of hope and dread. The details were sparse, the location vague, but it was more than they'd had in weeks, more than enough to hang a desperate plan on. He brought his findings to Vulcan High Command, laid out his case with a passion and conviction that left the brass looking uneasy. But for all his fire, their response was cool and non-committal. "The risk is too great," they said, hiding behind a wall of political double-talk. "We cannot provoke the ethereals unduly. The consequences could be catastrophic." Tyro stormed from the briefing room, his blood boiling, his fists clenched white-knuckled at his sides. If the high and mighty leaders wouldn't act, then by God, he would. He gathered his cadets in secret, laid out his plan in terse, clipped sentences. They'd go rogue, steal a ship, mount the rescue on their own, hang the consequences. To a soul, they agreed. George had molded them, forged them into something more than Vulcan military drones. They owed him everything, and they'd be damned if they'd leave him to rot in ethereal hands. As they made their final preparations, a shadow darkened the doorway of their makeshift command post. Tyro spun, hand flying to his blade, ready for anything. But the figure that stepped into the light was no enemy, but a Vulcan woman, her eyes hard and haunted. She introduced herself as Zara, a covert agent who'd spent years on the ethereal's trail. "I know what you're planning," she said, her voice low and urgent, "and I'm here to help." She laid out a tale that left Tyro reeling, his world tilting on its axis. The ethereals, she claimed, were no alien race, but a long-lost faction of humanity itself. Rogue separatists who'd broken away centuries ago and had been working from the shadows ever since to bend the galaxy to their will. Tyro's mind raced, pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. The ethereal's uncanny knowledge of human tactics, their eerie familiarity with George's own strategies, it all made a twisted kind of sense. He eyed Zara warily, torn between suspicion and a desperate need for any edge in the coming fight. In the end, pragmatism won out. He nodded curtly, welcoming her into the fold. As their stolen ship scorched its way towards the uncharted stars, Tyro stared out into the void, George's knife a comforting weight at his side. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were hurtling towards a reckoning, a confrontation with a truth that might shatter everything they thought they knew. But he pushed the doubts aside, fixed his eyes on the horizon. Whatever awaited them, whatever nightmares lurked in the ethereal dark, he would face it head-on. For George. For the man who'd taught him the meaning of human resolve. Tyro and Zara crept through the shadowy corridors of the ethereal facility, their weapons held at the ready. Zara's knowledge of the base's layout guided them past automated defenses and patrolling guards, bringing them ever closer to the command center and the answers they sought. As they ventured deeper, the sterile metal walls gave way to a cavernous chamber that stretched out before them. Row upon row of stasis pods lined the room, each one containing a motionless human figure suspended in a pale blue liquid. "The original ethereals," Zara whispered, her voice echoing in the eerie stillness. "They left Earth centuries ago, pursuing their own vision for humanity's future. With advanced technology, they've manipulated events from the shadows, guiding the course of galactic history." Tyro shook his head in disbelief. "All this time we thought they were aliens, but they were human all along. Why would they turn against their own kind?" Before Zara could respond, a piercing alarm shattered the silence. Red lights flashed and the thunder of approaching footsteps filled the air. They were surrounded, ethereal soldiers pouring into the chamber from every direction. Tyro and Zara fought back to back, their weapons spitting fire as they tried to hold off the onslaught. But the ethereals were too many, their armor too strong. A searing bolt caught Zara in the shoulder, spinning her to the ground. In the chaos, Tyro lost sight of her, a tide of enemies surging between them. He heard her cry out, saw her dragged away by the ethereal troops. Then he was alone, fighting for his life in a sea of hostile faces. With no choice left, Tyro fell back, blasting a path through the ethereals as he raced for the command center. His heart pounded, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Every step was a battle, every corridor a gauntlet of laser fire and snarling foes. In another part of the facility, the rest of Tyro's team fought their way through the detention block, their weapons blazing as they cut down ethereal guards. They found George in a reinforced cell, bruised and battered but alive. Xander, the tech specialist, hacked the door controls and the team surged inside. They cut George free of his restraints, pressing a weapon into his hands. The old soldier grinned fiercely, the fire of battle rekindling in his eyes. "I knew you'd come for me," he rasped, his voice rough with exhaustion and pride. "Now let's go show these bastards what it means to pick a fight with us." Together they carved a path of destruction through the facility, fighting their way towards the command center and the final confrontation that awaited them. Tyro, bloodied and exhausted, finally reached the command center. He burst through the doors, weapon leveled, ready for anything. But what he found stopped him cold. Standing before him was a grizzled, battle-scarred man who wore George's face like a twisted mirror. The ethereal leader, his eyes hard and unyielding, met Tyro's gaze with a smile that held no warmth. "Welcome, Tyro," the leader said, his voice a rumble of distant thunder. "I've been expecting you." Tyro's grip tightened on his weapon, confusion and anger warring within him. "Who are you? What have you done with George?" The leader chuckled, a sound like grating metal. "George is my brother, Tyro, my younger, foolish brother who could never see the bigger picture. He thought me dead, lost in the Terran-Zorgan war, but the ethereals found me, rebuilt me, showed me the truth of what must be done for the good of all." He spread his arms, encompassing the room, the facility, the whole of the ethereal empire. "Join us, Tyro. Take your place at my side, and together we will shape the future of the galaxy. You have the strength, the vision. With the ethereal's power, you could be a king among men." But then the doors exploded inward, and George was there, the rest of the team at his back. His eyes found his brother, and a look of anguish crossed his face. "Elias," George said, his voice rough with emotion, "please don't do this. It's not too late. You can still turn back from this path." The leader, Elias, shook his head, his smile turning sad. You never did understand, little brother. The sacrifices that must be made, the hard choices. I do this for the greater good, even if you can't see it. Weapons rose on both sides, tension stretching to the breaking point. Tyro stood between them, caught in the middle, the weight of the galaxy's fate resting on his shoulders. In that moment he knew he had to choose. His mentor and friend, the man who had taught him everything, or the ethereal leader offering power beyond his wildest dreams. The fate of billions hung in the balance, and Tyro, a simple soldier thrust onto the stage of galactic destiny, held the key to it all in his hands. The seconds ticked by, each one an eternity. Tyro's gaze flicked from George to Elias, indecision tearing at his heart. George's face was a mask of pain and desperate hope, silently pleading for his brother to see reason. Elias stood tall and unyielding, conviction etched in every line of his battle-scarred visage. The weight of the choice pressed down on Tyro like a physical thing. To stand with his mentor, the man who had forged him into the soldier he was today, or to grasp the tantalizing promise of power that Elias offered, the chance to shape the galaxy's destiny. His hand tightened on the knife at his belt, the blade that had been George's gift and constant companion, the symbol of everything the old soldier had taught him about honor, sacrifice, and the indomitable human spirit. And in that moment, Tyro knew there was no choice at all. He drew the knife in a single fluid motion, the blade gleaming under the cold light. He met Elias's gaze, saw the flicker of surprise and dawning realization in the ethereal leader's eyes. I stand with George, Tyro said, his voice ringing with quiet conviction, with humanity, and I'll fight to my last breath to stop you and the ethereals from poisoning our future. Elias's face twisted with anger and something like regret. So be it, he growled, his hand dropping to the weapon at his side. But before he could draw, George was moving, a blur of desperate speed. He tackled his brother, sending them both crashing to the floor in a tangle of limbs and fury. Tyro hesitated, torn, but the rest of the team was already moving, falling back towards the exit, setting charges as they went. He knew George was right. They had to end the ethereal threat here and now, no matter the cost. With a last anguished look at the battling brothers, Tyro turned and ran, his team close on his heels. They fought their way back through the facility, a running battle against the rallying ethereal forces. Alarms blared, the base shuddering under the impact of distant explosions. They barely made it to their shuttle before the whole structure began to come down around them, the charges they'd set ripping through the ethereal's stronghold. As they blasted free, the facility collapsing into rubble and flame behind them, Tyro could only watch in numb silence. Somewhere in that inferno, George and Elias were still locked in their titanic struggle, two brothers divided by fate and ideology. The shuttle shuddered, the shockwave of a massive explosion buffeting them. A blinding light filled the viewports, and Tyro knew with sinking certainty that nothing could have survived that blast. Tears stung his eyes, grief and anger warring within him. George was gone, sacrificing himself to stop his brother's mad ambitions. The ethereals were broken, their leadership decapitated, their secrets laid bare. But the cost had been so high, too high. As the shuttle limped back towards Vulcan space, Tyro made a silent vow. He would honor George's memory, carry on his legacy. He would stand watch against the darkness, the threats that lurked in the shadows of the galaxy. For he was human, and the fire of humanity's stubborn defiance burned bright within him. He would be the shield and the sword, the guardian and the avenger, and he would never, never forget the man who had shown him the way. The war was over, but for Tyro, for all of them, the fight had only just begun. Tyro stared down the barrel of his gun, the weight of the moment crushing his chest. George's words echoed in his mind, a clarion call to the principles he'd drilled into Tyro's very bones. In that instant, the path forward crystallized with blinding clarity. He spun, leveling his weapon at the ethereal leader. "No, I stand with George, with humanity. Your way is wrong." The leader's face contorted with rage. "You fool, you'd betray your own potential?" "You betrayed us first," Tyro snarled, "when you abandoned our values, our unity." "Flank left," he barked, decades of training galvanizing his actions. "Cover fire now." His soldiers obeyed crisply. Unconventional moves honed under George's relentless drills flowing like water. They wove between consoles, luring the ethereals into overlapping kill zones. Across the room, George crashed into his brother, a titan's fury in every blow. Fists hammered flesh, bone cracked on bone, a lifetime of anguish fueling each strike. They rolled across the floor, snarling, grappling, neither giving an inch. Tyro glimpsed Zara, crumpled and bleeding in the leader's sanctum. White-hot anger surged through him. He tore into the enemy ranks, George's knife flashing, gun barking in staccato concert. Slowly, inexorably, the tide turned. Tyro's team shattered the ethereal's rigid lines, human-taught tenacity trumping mechanical discipline. Tyro kicked through the sanctum door, hauling Zara to her feet. Together they advanced on the dueling brothers, locked in hateful stalemate. Tyro aimed his weapon squarely at the leader. "Is it?" The leader sneered, blood bubbling over his lips. "You think this is the end? You've barely glimpsed what we—" George's knife hand struck like a snake, steel gleaming as it found his brother's throat. The leader crumpled, shock splashed across his face. "I glimpsed enough," George said coldly, standing over the twitching body. "I read the files, I know your plan, and it dies here." "The data—" Zara groaned, clutching her side. "We need to warn them." "We will," Tyro nodded grimly. "But first we burn this place to the ground. No trace, no recovery." As the team moved out, securing the facility sector by sector, the scale of the ethereal sin crashed over Tyro in relentless waves. Centuries of manipulation, shadowed hands sowing strife across 100 worlds, all to advance their twisted agenda. But now at last, the galaxy had a fighting chance. The ethereals were broken, their schemes dragged into the searing light, and Tyro would ensure that light spread to every benighted corner of the cosmos. There were battles still to come, wars yet to wage, but Tyro would be ready, they all would, for they were humanity's children, taught and tempered in the crucible of George's resolve. They would stand, they would fight, they would bleed. And they would win, no matter the cost. Thunderous applause echoed through the grand halls of Vulcan High Command as Tyro and his team strode forward to accept their commendations. The Vulcan leadership, once hesitant and skeptical, now showered the heroes with praise for their instrumental role in unmasking the ethereal's insidious plot. Tyro stood tall, his eyes gleaming with a mix of pride and steely resolve. As the accolades washed over him, his mind was already racing ahead, mapping out the next steps in the fight against the ethereal threat. High Commander Zoran approached Tyro, his expression grave. "Your actions have bought us valuable time," he said, clasping Tyro's shoulder. "But the ethereal's reach runs deep. We need you to lead a special task force, to hunt down and eliminate the remaining cells before they can regroup." As the ceremony concluded, Tyro gathered his team, their faces a mix of exhaustion and determination. They knew the road ahead would be long and perilous, but they were ready to face whatever challenges lay in store. Back at the Vulcan Military Academy, George stood before a fresh batch of recruits, his grizzled face etched with hard-won wisdom. The lessons of the ethereal conflict weighed heavily on his mind as he surveyed the eager young faces before him. "You're here because you have the potential to be more than just soldiers," he said, his voice ringing through the training grounds. "You're here to learn what it means to be a warrior, to fight not just with weapons, but with your minds, your hearts, and your indomitable human spirit." He paced before them, his prosthetic leg thumping against the hard-packed dirt. "The enemies you'll face out there will be unlike anything you've ever encountered. They'll be cunning, ruthless, and utterly convinced of their own superiority. But you have something they'll never understand, the resilience and adaptability that lies at the core of every human being." George's eyes blazed as he spoke, his words igniting a fire in the recruits' hearts. It's not about the strength of your arms or the speed of your ships. It's about the strength of your will and the unbreakable bonds that tie us together. That's what the Ethereals failed to grasp, and that's why they'll ultimately fail. As the recruits stood straighter, their eyes gleaming with newfound purpose, George allowed himself a small smile. The future of the Vulcan race, and perhaps the galaxy itself, would rest on the shoulders of these young warriors, and he would make damn sure they were ready for the challenge. Light years away, Tyro and his task force emerged from warp speed on the fringes of a long-abandoned star system. Intelligence reports had pointed to a hidden ethereal base in the area, but initial scans showed no signs of activity. Tyro frowned at the readouts, a nagging sense of unease prickling at the back of his neck. "Stay sharp," he warned his team. "If there's one thing we've learned, it's that the Ethereals are masters of deception." As they approached the system's lone habitable planet, a small moon orbiting a gas giant, Tyro's suspicions were confirmed. A sudden burst of energy from the moon's surface, quickly suppressed, betrayed the presence of advanced technology far beyond the derelict appearance of the abandoned settlements below. "Clever bastards," Tyro muttered. "They've disguised their base as a forgotten mining colony, but they can't hide from us." He turned to his team, his expression grim. "We go in quiet and fast, locate the base, gather any intel we can, and neutralize any resistance. Remember your training, trust your instincts, and watch each other's backs. We're not leaving until this place is nothing but rubble." As the task force made their final preparations, checking weapons and donning tactical gear, Tyro allowed himself a moment to reflect on the weight of their mission. The Ethereals' treachery ran deeper than any of them had ever imagined, and rooting out their influence would be a long and arduous process. But as he looked at the determined faces of his comrades, each one a testament to the indomitable human spirit that had carried them this far, Tyro felt a surge of hope and resolve. They would face this challenge as they had faced every other, with courage, cunning, and an unbreakable will to protect the innocent from those who would do them harm. And they would not rest until the galaxy was free from the Ethereals' twisted machinations, once and for all. As Tyro's stealth ship hurtled through the void, the comm system crackled to life with an urgent distress call from Vulcan. Tyro's blood ran cold as he listened to the desperate pleas for help, the sounds of explosions and weapons fire echoing in the background. The Ethereals, in a last desperate gambit, had launched a vicious assault on the Vulcan Military Academy, the very heart of Vulcan resistance, the place where George had forged Tyro and countless others into warriors of unbreakable human spirit. Tyro slammed his fist on the console, a storm of emotions raging within him. To abandon his mission now, with the final ethereal stronghold within reach, could mean sacrificing their only chance to end this war once and for all. But George, the man who had been his mentor, his guide, his shining example of what it meant to be human in the face of unimaginable adversity, how could he turn his back on him now, in his hour of greatest need? With a heavy heart, Tyro made the call. He split his team, sending half to complete the crucial mission, while he and the rest raced back to Vulcan, praying they would not be too late. As they descended through the smoke-choked atmosphere, the full horror of the attack became clear. The once proud academy lay in ruins, its walls shattered, its grounds littered with the broken bodies of Vulcan and Ethereal alike. Tyro and his squad hit the ground running, weapons blazing as they carved a path through the chaos. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation, driven by the need to find George, to stand with him one last time. And then, through the haze of battle, Tyro saw him. George, battered and bloodied, standing alone against a tide of ethereal assassins. His weapon bucked in his hands, each shot a defiant roar against the dying of the light. Tyro and his team surged forward, crashing into the ethereal lines like a thunderbolt. They fought shoulder to shoulder with their mentor, a whirlwind of steel and fire, the old human and his young Vulcan protégé united in one final stand. But even as they battled, Tyro could see the toll the fight was taking on George. His movements were slower, his breathing labored, and still the Ethereals came, a relentless tide of death and destruction. In a moment that would be seared into Tyro's memory forever, George threw himself in front of a barrage of ethereal fire, his body shielding Tyro and his team from the deadly onslaught. He fell to the ground, his life's blood spilling onto the shattered concrete. Tyro was at his side in an instant, cradling his mentor's broken form. Tears streamed down his face as he begged George to hold on, to stay with him. But George, even in his final moments, had one last lesson to impart. With a voice that was little more than a whisper, he spoke of the true strength of humanity. Not their weapons, not their tactics, but their unbreakable spirit, their willingness to fight for what was right, no matter the cost. "That's what you must carry on, Tyro," he rasped, his hand gripping his students with fading strength. "That's the legacy I leave to you." And with those words, George Mitchell, the man who had taught Tyro what it meant to be human, breathed his last. Rage and grief surged through Tyro like a wildfire. He rose to his feet, George's knife clenched in one hand, his rifle in the other. Around him the surviving Vulcan warriors looked to him, their eyes searching for guidance, for leadership. And with that cry they charged, a tide of vengeful fury that crashed against the ethereal ranks. They fought with a savagery they had never known, fueled by the memory of the man who had given everything for them. Inch by blood-soaked inch, they drove the ethereals back, reclaiming the shattered ruins of the Academy. And as the last enemy fell, a ragged cheer went up from the Vulcan lines, a cry of victory tinged with the bitter sting of loss. In the aftermath, as the smoke cleared and the wounded were tended to, word came from the other half of Tyro's team. The ethereal stronghold had fallen, the war was over, the galaxy was safe. But the cost had been so high, too high. As Tyro looked out over the ruins of the Academy, the weight of George's sacrifice heavy on his shoulders, he knew that the road ahead would be long and hard. There was so much to rebuild, so many scars to heal. But he also knew that he would not have to walk that road alone. George's spirit, his indomitable human will, lived on in every Vulcan who had fought this day, in every warrior that Tyro would train in the years to come. They were George's legacy, the bearers of the torch of human resilience in a galaxy that would always need its light. And as Tyro took up the mantle of leadership, as he set about the task of rebuilding the Academy and forging a new generation of heroes, he could almost feel George's presence at his side. Guiding him, inspiring him, reminding him that even in the darkest of times the spirit of humanity would endure, a beacon of hope, now and forever. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.